Here, FBI saying, "Oh, why are you going on the Clay Douglas show?"
My message to those guys, if they're listening this morning, is go get a cup of coffee. Maybe you'll learn something.
We both took the same oath, to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I don't recall there being an expiration date on that.
I'm going to keep my big BA, keep my friends the same, keep the government out of my business, and y'all can keep the change.
He is the free American, Clay Douglas.
We know what we need. We know who to blame.
Catch the Free American Hour, weekdays at 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern.
I'll keep the USA and y'all can keep the change.
For the podcast and more details, visit www.freeamerican.com or catch the podcast by phone by calling 832-999-8621.
All right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of the Free American Hour. I'm your host, Clay Douglas. My guest today is Bill Piper, and he's with the drugpolicy.org. I will probably open up my phone lines, 646-915-8774, if you want to call in. I may or may not take calls, but you can certainly hear the show on that line. Hello, Bill. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, sir. I've been kind of looking forward to this interview because you're actually talking about a change that I approve of, and that's in the drug laws in America. Now, I've said if a person can walk up to you with a badge and say, "Son, what do you got in your pocket there?" Ooh, you're going to have to go to jail for that. I think that's a police state. I think you're living in a police state. And to boot, with the passages of the current drug laws back in the 30s, they outlawed our number one cash crop, which was hemp. And as Ron Paul, presidential candidate, said, you'd have to smoke a joint the size of a telephone pole to get high off of hemp. What's the situation, Bill? Now tell me about the drugpolicy.org and what you guys are about.
Sure. Well, last year marked the 40th anniversary of President Nixon declaring a war on drugs. And in those 40 years, the U.S. has arrested tens of millions of people for marijuana and other drugs. And, they've spent more than $1 trillion. They've busted down a lot of doors. They've suspended a lot of civil liberties. But, drugs are still cheap, potent, and readily available in every community. So, what we've been doing, hasn't worked, and it's never going to work. As long as there's a demand for something, there's going to be a supply, to meet it. And prohibition didn't work with alcohol, and it doesn't work with marijuana and other drugs either. And so, what the Drug Policy Alliance is trying to do is, reform U.S. drug laws, in particular to let states set their own policies. It's time to end the role that criminalization and the criminal justice system plays in dealing with drugs, and treat drug use as a health issue. And if states want to legalize marijuana or other drugs and try a new approach, they should be able to. And we need to get the federal government out of this.
Now, I agree with that statement entirely. The states have the right. Now, 40 years ago, while I was in a Texas penitentiary, remember back when it was a possible life sentence to get caught with a joint in Texas, especially if you were black.
Mm-hmm.
And in there I wrote about a future in the United States in which all laws against victimless crimes were abolished and drugs were sold openly and simply controlled for quality by state governments. Is that a potential future at all, or
I think it's definitely a potential. I mean, you know, a substantial majority, something like 75% of Americans say the war on drugs has failed. About half, a little over half, you know, 51% say treat marijuana like alcohol, legalize it, regulate it, tax it, license it, treat it, you know, like alcohol. Different states treat alcohol differently. And, you know, majority of people in the western states, a pretty significant majority in the western states want to legalize marijuana, and the majority in the Midwest and the majority on the East Coast want to. And Colorado and Washington State will be voting on it in November. And the polling is about 50-50 in each state. So, you know, there's a reasonable chance, certainly within the next, you know, if not this year, within the next 2 to 4 years, at least one state is going to legalize marijuana. And I think when people see that the sky doesn't fall, then other states will follow, you know, will follow suit. But I think everyone knows what we're doing isn't working, and so it's just, and the politicians, the problem is the politicians are a little, you know, they're too afraid to even talk about this issue. So it has to be the voters that are going to lead this.
Yeah, they're afraid to talk about a lot of issues, especially relating to banking and relating to, you know, I have a book out called Mystery Babylon, The New World Order Unveiled, and in it I tell the whole story of 25 years ago somebody handed me a document that probably should have been classified top secret about the CIA under George Bush, a CIA director, bringing tons of cocaine into Panama, from Colombia into Panama, and then on up to Mena, Arkansas. I mean, this means the CIA and the Mossad were running the drugs in here, and then they're busting us, the American people, putting us in jail. You said 50 million people have been busted for some type of drug or marijuana?
Yeah, it's tens of millions just in the last 40 years alone. And just to put it in kind of an annual perspective, you know, 1.6 million Americans were arrested last year for a drug offense. In most cases, for marijuana, and, you know, 90% of marijuana arrests are for simple possession of small amounts for personal use. And so, you know, not just 1 year, 1.6 million. And, you know, some of those people did serious time, others spent a couple of days in jail. But even a couple of days is enough. You know, if you don't show up for work because you're in jail, then you've lost your job, then you have this criminal conviction, so it becomes harder to get another job. And there's all sorts of things in the book that, if you have a conviction, you know, makes it harder to get school loans or public assistance or et cetera. And so it's not just, you know, that people are being arrested. It's, you know, this stuff follows them around, you know, for life. And, you know, some people, you know, do okay, you know. Yeah, some people go on to be president, or, you know, the United States president.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And I've interviewed the people that were there and took the videos delivering 2 kilos of cocaine to George Bush and Jeb Bush over there in Florida. Yeah, we're how do we put these, if this is government sanctioned? Now this is the drug, I mean, we just had the story that broke here, and I had Larry Pratt on from Gun Owners of America to talk about that. He's a lobbyist. The BATF here, the same ones that killed and attacked a church full of women and children in Waco, were supplying guns to the drug cartels, which I know the drug cartels are the CIA and the Mossad. This is big bucks, and this is organized efforts, and they simply take out, like the Median cartel. They were wiped out, and they replaced them with the bankers and the Cali cartel. They're laundering their money, the drug money that through Wells Fargo and Bank of America, aren't they?
Well, there's definitely a lot of drug money being, you know, laundered. I mean, drug money built, you know, South Beach and Miami, for instance, in the 80s. So there's millions and millions of dollars, and the Mexican, you know, drug cartels make, you know, several $billions a year off of selling marijuana in the U.S. And so they're using that money to buy guns and to, you know, soldiers and bribing police officers and missile launchers and just wreaking havoc, all over Mexico and to a much lesser extent the United States as well. And it's basically like Al Capone, only far more horrible and far more profitable. And all of that could go away, by simply legalizing marijuana and other drugs. That would put.
I would like to see, I would like to see a little bit more than that. I'd like to see them abolish all laws against victimless crimes. If you want to kill yourself with heroin, just go sit in that corner. We'll put a bell on your body so when you fall over, somebody can come pick up the body. Why spend $50,000? Isn't that what how much? If you put somebody in prison right now, the prisons are going to be making what, $50,000 per inmate?
It depends. Yeah, it's anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 depending on the state. And in contrast, treatment is $5,000. So even if the government just provided treatment instead of incarceration, taxpayers would save $45,000 a year. But it's an enormous amount of money spent on prisons and on law enforcement and court costs and everything else. So we spent all this money, more than $1 trillion. We spent more than $1 trillion fighting drugs in the last 40 years, and yet the last 3 presidents, 2 of them have openly admitted to having used illegal drugs, and one everybody knows did. He just didn't quite come out and say it. Yeah, George Bush talked about his youthful discretions whenever asked about drugs, but he never actually said that he used drugs. But so, to spend all that money and arrest all those people, but to have, presidents and Supreme Court justices and the CEOs and others openly admit that they've used drugs, it just shows it's just been a monumental failure and it's been a waste of an enormous amount of taxpayer money.
But Ayn Rand, almost 50 years ago, told us that the government has, in Atlas Shrugged, the government has no power over honest citizens, so they have to make criminals out of us. And in my opinion, we've been under assault here. We rebelled against the New World Order of the day. The sun never sets on the English Empire. We rebelled against that, and we set up our own constitutional. First time in about 6,000 years that a system of government was set up that gave the people power. And that power of the people, they've been trying to usurp that ever since it began. Through the banks, through the financial system, through the established world trade, and we've got presidents talking about the whole New World Order. I take that to mean the global government. One world currency, one world religion. One world people, and to do that, they got to break down any national resistance or national pride, according to the Communist Manifesto. And that's what basically the drug laws were the start of it. The prohibition was the start of it. They turned our farmers and ranchers into criminals, into bootleggers and moonshiners. And now, if you're growing hemp in your backyard, which our Constitution was written on, the helicopters buzz you, and now they send in the drones after you. I mean, this is a war on the American people. I've said, Bill, that the war on terror is a war against anyone, anywhere in the world who doesn't want to go along with one world government. And the war on drugs was the beginning of the war against the American people. They turned us into criminals with these drugs. We used to smoke a joint and go to the theater at midnight and watch Reefer Madness and laugh our asses off.
Well, and it also, is a war on people who don't even use illegal substances. There's a lot of no-knock raids in which they're looking for drugs, but they get the wrong house, and they basically terrorize those families. Under state and federal conspiracy laws, they don't even really have to have any real evidence. All they need is someone to point their finger and say they sold you drugs, or that or that you sell drugs, and that could be enough to convict you. And so a lot of times you see these cases of people going to jail based solely on the word of an undercover informant who basically gets paid to point his finger at people, or on people trying to reduce their prison sentences, etc. And so you're absolutely right about the government using the drug laws, to criminalize people, especially those who are using drugs, but even people who aren't get swept up under these pretty harsh.
If drugs were legal, you could plant some really nice bud in your backyard without worrying about going to jail. We wouldn't have the drug smuggling cartels coming up here, running Mexicans that were run out of put off their farms by NAFTA, and now they're using them as mules to bring pot up here. We could be growing in our backyards. But we do have presidential candidates that are saying that the war on drugs is insanity. Ron Paul is saying it's insanity to be arresting our own people over something that our Constitution and our flag were made on, created out of.
Yeah, and Gary Johnson, has said it. When he was running the Republican primary, now he's running, for the Libertarian primary. Dennis Kucinich, when he ran for president in the Democratic primary 4 years ago, has said it. And so a growing number of people in different parties, are starting to say it, and they're realizing, not only is it not hurting them politically, it's helping. Because there's millions of people out there who've been affected by, either drugs or the drug war or both. And people want change. They want to try something new.
Well, I wrote about that 40 years ago about there were 4 states in my novel, which was a science fiction novel at the time, by the way, and still is, but 4 states kept the same laws that they got today. All the Christians moved to Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Mississippi. And the port of New Orleans is where they brought in all the ganja, all the cannabis, all of the illegal drugs in the rest of the United States. So I wrote that as a science fiction book. Now I'm updating that as a trilogy to take in about 10,000 years of history and a couple of thousand years in the future. And I'll do that in a 3-part series. But in that imaginary world that I created, you could walk down the street and smoke a joint, and walk into a bar and order anything that you wanted. And there wasn't any crime. There wasn't anybody. There wasn't any insanity. There wasn't nothing. It was just a normal, peaceful place. And in 4 states, you got people. They were still throwing people in prison for whatever they had in their car.
Yeah, prohibition is definitely the best friend of of organized crime. They love prohibition. There's the old saying from alcohol prohibition. That the 2 people benefited from, alcohol prohibition were, the bootleggers and the police, both of whom profited, off of prohibition, and definitely prohibition of marijuana and other drugs. It's billions of dollars a year to organize crime. They didn't use that money, for all sorts of other crimes. And then there's a lot of law enforcement agencies that also make a lot of money off of the drug war. The way the federal government, the federal programs, basically, the more people you arrest for drugs, the more money you get for your department. It's overtime in a lot of places. In New York City, they call it collars for dollars. You basically wait until the last hour of your shift to arrest someone for marijuana, which is pretty easy to do in New York City, because everyone's smoking it. And then you have 3 hours of overtime that you've racked up. And then there's asset forfeiture, in which they can take your property without even convicting you of a crime. All they have to do is say you used it. And then it's up to you to prove that your property is innocent. So a lot of people get swept up in that. People who don't have their money in banks, for instance, they accuse it of being drug money, even if it's your life savings, and then they take it. And then you have to go into court and prove a negative.
And that's just absolutely amazing to me. You know, innocent until proven guilty just isn't occurring in a police state, is it?
Yeah, definitely with asset forfeiture, it's guilty until you can prove it innocent. It differs from state to state, but
now what do we do about if this whole system, this whole penal system, this is on the stock market. You can buy stock in prisons, can't you?
Well, I mean, you can with the private prisons.
Yeah.
Yeah, the private prisons definitely. You can buy stock in. They make a lot of money off of, incarceration. There's some evidence that they've lobbied for tougher sentences or to make more things crimes. They certainly have a financial stake in it. But even in the public prisons, in the government prisons, like California, for instance, California, the biggest and most powerful special interest in California is the prison guard union. And they have an enormous, every politician is afraid of them because they have so many prisons and so many prison guards that, they get an enormous amount of prison dues, or union dues, and then they use those union dues, millions of dollars a year, to elect or defeat certain politicians. And so the prison guard unions routinely oppose anything that will reduce the number of people in prison. So, between the private prisons and then the prison guard unions and the government prisons, just an enormous amount of money.
Now, Bill, what's happened in the last month? Actually, in the last month, we've basically suspended posse comitatus. We've allowed the new legislation allows the government to bring troops into this country, and we've got the detention centers already established. We paid Brown and Root $350 million. At one time in the '60s, they were talking about coming after anybody that was smoking pot, anybody that was using drugs, and put them in those detention centers. And they did that. I mean, isn't that what they call federal or state penitentiaries? Didn't they do that? They came after us. They put us in jail for smoking a joint.
Well, they still put people in jail for smoking a joint. In some cases, 13 states have decriminalized, so you're probably only going to pay a fine. But in the other states, you're going to serve some jail time. And, if you have multiple offenses, it could be pretty significant.
In Texas, they've got a young man in jail in Texas that they caught him with some medicinal marijuana that he had from prescription for in California. They caught him with it in Texas, and he was facing 99 years if they got him extradited him back to Texas. So my novels about Texas being a police state weren't too far off, were they?
No, not really. And they also, between the mandatory minimum sentencing, in which, exactly. It sweeps in a lot of people, first-time drug offenders, etc., who face an enormous amount of time. And with the prosecutors, there's so many drug laws in the books that what the prosecutors try to do is they literally, they throw the book at you, and you're facing, 99 years, and then they try to convince you to plead guilty. So you might plead guilty to 10 years, which sounds, why would you plead guilty to a crime you didn't commit? But when you're facing 99 years, a lot of people are, and so...
That was exactly the situation. You can get life if you go for a jury,
Yeah, there was, the Tulia, Texas case, which wasn't about marijuana, it was about cocaine, in which a undercover informant basically pointed his finger at, about 1/3 of the town's black population and said that they sold him cocaine, but the only evidence that was ever presented was his testimony. They never found any drugs or guns or anything like that when they raided people's houses. And the first couple of people, to go to court played innocent, and they got sentences like 99 years, 125 years, 50 years, and so a whole bunch of other people just took the plea bargains, which were 20 years, And it took a good 4 or 5 years for all the cases to fall apart, and the governor ended up pardoning a lot of people because it just became so clear that this informant was a liar. But that's what happened. You're facing these enormous sentences, and you just have this incentive to plead guilty because there's a good chance you're going to be convicted even if you're innocent.
Now, tell me about your organization. What is it doing? I mean, I've wrote books about this. And my books will be available, folks, this year. I'll be finishing it up because I started them 40 years ago. I got a head start. But the society I predicted is a society that we need to have here. We need to quit we're putting the wrong people in jail. Somebody can steal couple of trillion dollars from us, and we don't do nothing. But you can put somebody and ruin their life, put them in jail for something they had in their pocket. I mean, we're putting the wrong people in jail.
The irony is a lot of nonviolent drug offenders not only get longer sentences than people who steal a large amount of money, they get longer sentences than people who commit violent crimes sometimes. In New York, up until real recently, just possessing and selling a small amount of drugs would get you 15 years to life with a 15-year mandatory minimum. But in many cases, a lot of murderers end up, serving 15 years. So often we see these nonviolent drug offenders get sentences that are really disproportionate to the offense that they committed.
Now, one of the byproducts from this drug war is we've got 40 million people that now have criminal records that I mean, I've been stopped over. You've been to prison, haven't you, Mr. Douglas? Yeah, sure have. 40 years ago. Why? What's it to you? Well, we need to run dogs around your car. Sure, knock yourself out.
Yeah, we have, right now there's about 2.3 million people in prison, another 5 million on parole or probation, and any given year about 700,000 people are coming out of prison. So we're shuffling a lot of people into prison for some of those people probably belong in prison. Many of them probably don't, and then they get out, and it's like a scarlet letter that makes it really hard to get a job, or especially in some states, you can be barred. If you have a criminal conviction, you can't get licenses for things. You can't be a nurse, you can't be a dentist, you can't be a barber, you can't be whatever you need a license for. Some states say you can't have a license if you've committed a felony offense. You commit a drug offense, you can lose your student loan, and be prohibited in some cases from having student loans, for getting student loans for life, and you can't get public assistance. In some states, you can't even vote. I mean, that's scary part. A lot of the southern states,
and you can't get a conviction reversed, so you can own firearms either. The BATF closed that department. And so basically what they're doing here, they're creating criminals, they're creating laws, they're violating their own laws. They're the ones that are bringing in the drugs, they're the ones that are funding the drug dealers, they're the ones that are laundering the money through the banks, through Wells Fargo. Now how do we stop this if our whole Congress here is basically set up as organized crime with this little district called District of Columbia?
Well, I mean, things are changing. Congressman Barney Frank and Ron Paul have a bill to let states set their own marijuana policy, and that has, I think, 20 co-sponsors. There was a recent vote that would have criminalized more drugs, some synthetic drugs, and that passed the House, but 100 people voted against it on the floor. So their tide is shifting. I think it's just a matter of time. And when you look at the state level, things are much better at the state level. So a lot of states